Good evening. Today, I would like to talk about that very thorny issue of fakes and forgeries. This is a problem encountered not only by collectors, but also by museums, because ultimately what collectors collect, museums obtain. Many museum collections, particularly in bronze and glass, have been penetrated by modern fakes. If I go back a little bit, I had the pleasure of being a Fulbright lecturer at the University of Damascus between 2002 and 2003. To give a little bit of background, at that time, this was before the real crisis in that country, and this was before the Middle East had exploded. Although there were problems, intrepid travelers did enjoy themselves in Syria, and Syria was improving its tourist infrastructure so that hotels and restaurants were getting better and better. At the same time, there were more and more things for tourists to buy, and unfortunately, this did include fakes. I use the word fake with the idea that there is an intent to deceive. If you buy something purporting to be ancient, and it is in fact new, you have bought a fake. They also sold replicas. A good example of a replica is this Christian lamp, perhaps dating to the 2nd or 3rd century AD, and it is dated 2002. The date is very important here because it allows a tourist to put this in their luggage and to present it to authorities at the border with no problem whatsoever. Another example would be this Neo-Babylonian figurine, very simple style, but it also has a stamp on the back. It is made in exactly the same way it would have been made in the 3rd or 4th century BC. A very simple mold. Clay was pressed into the single face mold. It would have been allowed to dry to the leather hard stage, and then it would have been removed, dried further, and then fired. In a case like this, a tourist would return home with an object that was very similar, if not almost exactly the same as the real thing, at a tiny fraction of the price and without any legal problems. Replicas, because they are replicas, and particularly if they're labeled as replicas, don't attract official scrutiny. Many people are familiar with the drug trade. Drugs and illegal antiquities, that is, antiquities that have been excavated and are put on the market for transport, usually to Western markets, use the same channels. And this is of great interest to people in Syria, particularly the authorities. Obviously, they did want to control the drug trade. At the same time, they were very concerned to control the illicit antiquities trade. There's no way to completely stamp out the trade in illicit antiquities, but there are several dealers in Syria who were doing their part in a very interesting way. This is a good example of a common type of Roman glass vessel. It is a Roman blown glass vessel. This is a fake. They were made by the Romans in Syria starting about the 1st century BC, and by the 1st century AD, these glass vessels were replacing ceramic for a number of uses. This is a luxury glass vessel, a cage vessel that is made a similar way. It is also blown, and if you can see through it, It has what looks like a patina on it. It looks like it's been buried for some period of time. And it's quite artistic. It's not broken. It's in very good condition. Here's a vessel, blue, and it has even a bit of an iridescent sheen on it. Many museums and collectors wrongly assume that because glass is difficult to make, it would not be faked. This is not true. There is at least one dealer, and if not many more, who sell in Damascus these vessels to unsuspecting tourists. The reasoning is quite simple. The antiquities trade is tightly controlled. The authorities do not allow the open sale of illegally excavated antiquities. It's somewhat ironic that people would go to Syria, where many modern conveniences and electronic items are available from all corners of the world, and expect that somehow they will be able to get an ancient vessel that would look something like this at a discount. The question would be, why could the Syrians obtain electronic equipment, like modern computers, and not be able to export antiquities? At the same time, the dealers who sell these objects say that they are regularly inspected by the police to make sure that they do not sell illicit antiquities. But I want to move now from the Roman world to the art world. This is another example of some of the glass that is being sold in Syria. As is clear, the Jewish theme, it's a beautiful vessel. It's actually a work of art in its own right. Here's another, what looks like cosmetic vessel. And this was blown into a mold. In other words, the maker inflated glass that was on a metal tube into a 2 or 3-part mold to create something that is very complicated. Again, just because this is complicated does not mean a forger will not know the correct technique for making these items. Perhaps another example would be this. This is made in a 2-part mold. You can see the seam very clearly here. And it has a head. The iridescence is very difficult to replicate. I understand that the forgers used a lot of lemon juice as well as urine, considerable amount of time, and also burial to replicate the surface of ancient glass. Ancient glass is made from silica, which is present in abundance in the Near East in terms of sand and quartz gravels. It's heated to a high temperature, and then from that point onward, it begins its process of degradation. It is very sensitive to water. Syria was a major hotspot for this high temperature industry, and it still is. If we go back a little bit before the Romans, we reach a period that some people know as the Phoenician period, whereas in other parts of the Near East it would be called Babylonian. Other periods would be linked to particular palace workshops. Glass of this period dates to about the 6th century BC and continued all the way up to the 1st century BC, when very rapid methods of manufacturing glass were used. Of course, these early glass workers were Syrian, and there is good evidence that the Romans took Syrian and Judean captives and used them for making their glass and launching their glass industry. Sometime before, during this, what in Syria would be roughly known as the Phoenician period, there are what is called core-formed glass vessels. It's core-formed because there would have been a core inside of this vessel that was not made of glass, and the glass was trailed or wrapped around the outside of this core. It was not blown like the later Roman glass. So in the 1st century BC, we have people using an inflation technique for making glass vessels. It was hot worked, including into a variety of what some people would say comical shapes, like this fish that has a very modern, happy smile to it. These vessels are of an entirely different level of artistic achievement, and in fact, I understand a retired archaeologist from Syria made these. These vessels continue to appear on Western markets, and I have seen many in many auction houses. Now, if we move on to the general issue of illicit antiquities and fakes, the most obvious conclusion to draw is that when purchasing something that is a purported antiquity, it is a far better idea to purchase something that you know is a replica, and you purchase it at a replica price. This means that a vessel like this, instead of costing many $1,000s, you could purchase for $100 or $200. This is in fact a very low price considering how much real work and artistry went into this vessel. At the same time, if you get a letter from the dealer who sold you the vessel, you should have little trouble taking your purchase out of the host country. There are many examples of tourists assuming that because they're in a country like Syria or Turkey, that they can leave with their purchases. If you have an illicit antiquity, and if you are caught with an illicit antiquity, the chances are high that not only will your antiquity be seized, but you will as well. To avoid this unfortunate sequence of events, it is a better idea to even purchase antiquities, or so-called antiquities like this, in your home country and purchase them as replicas. The illicit antiquities trade destroys a huge amount of evidence and also aids and abets real criminals who are also involved in the drug trade. It is critical that people take responsibility, personal responsibility, for stamping out this trade. There are many ways to appreciate the artistry of the past, and I think one of the best ways is to appreciate the artists of the present who work using past materials and techniques. Thank you very much.